Okay, I think we'll get cracking because we've just got an hour and it's a massive topic that we're squeezing into now 58 minutes. It's really great to see people and still coming through. I am Ben Cairns from IVAR, and I led the piece of work that around which this webinar has been organized, and I'm absolutely delighted to have done that and to work with colleagues on it. And I just want to do a quick shout out to the IVAR team that worked on this project and has done such in my humble opinion, a very good piece of work. I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves, give a bit of housekeeping, and then we're going to get stuck right into it. So I'll go around on my screen. Sarah, can you go first?
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm the Chief Executive of the Barrow Cadbury Trust, and I've been involved in this work at the Trust for almost 15 years.
Thanks, Sarah. Nadine.
I'm Nadine. I am the project manager for the Young Justice Advisors from Leaders Unlocked.
Thanks, Nadine. And Raheel.
I'm Raheel. I'm the director of Maslahah, and I've been working with Barrow Cadbury for years now, and I can't remember how many years, but a lot.
Great. And we're going to hear from all of you in a second. Just a tiny bit of housekeeping. This is a webinar. I'm guessing a lot of you are eating your lunch. That is fine. We are going to talk a fair bit, but there will be some time towards the end. We hope around 15 to 20 minutes for questions from and answers, we hope, from our panelists. So please post questions in the chat. If we don't get to them, we will try and answer them afterwards, and we will follow up. We are recording, and the recording will be distributed with subtitles soon after the event. Use the chat also to post links if there is work that you've been involved in which feels relevant to what we're talking about today, and we can summarize and circulate those. And a blog written by Sarah and myself and a link to the report has also been posted in the chat. So please read that. You should have received the report in advance, but it's big and there's a lot of detail in it. So we are hoping we will also have opportunities to return to this topic because it needs thinking about carefully and over a sustained period. So I'm going to ask Sarah to kick us off with a bit of framing. We're then going to hear from Nadine and then Raheel about their experience and perspectives of being part of this initiative and wider reflections about funding for systems change. Back to Sarah for some closing reflections, and then I will offer some brief observations from the perspective of the researchers before we go into Q&A. So, Sarah, welcome, and over to you.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks everyone for coming and for having an interest in this. I'm charged with giving you a little bit of background, the aspiration of Transition to Adulthood Alliance, and the philosophy behind it. Barrow Cadbury Trust is over 100 years old now and has been involved in criminal justice work for that amount of time and longer, because Geraldine Cadbury, who was one of the founders, Barrow Cadbury's wife, was a criminal justice campaigner. She set up the first children's court in the UK with some of her mates in Birmingham. There were two, one here and one in the States at the same time. Never before had children been tried other than in an adult court on adult terms. So this has got a very long tail. They were then involved in setting up bail hostels, young women's hostels that were actually called the Naughty Girls Hostels privately, I think, I believe, and forerunner work, which we would now consider similar to probation work. So what's the aspiration of T2A? The aspiration is to change the way that the criminal justice system treats the post-juvenile, the young adult age group, so late teenage to mid-20s, on the proposition that that transition is gradual, it's variable, and that young people are not fully mature until their mid-20s, and the neuroscience now backs that up. Say a little bit more about that later. What this followed was the Youth Justice Board in the previous period, which had had a great deal of success in reducing the numbers of children, the under 18s, in the criminal justice system. Although at the same time, the disproportionality of those left behind during that period of racialized young people was became higher, which was, that's not a good thing. But there were very high numbers in prison of this age group and very high reoffending rates. The desire for new approaches with reference to homelessness, care leavers, drugs and alcohol, education, training, all those things that we've known about for a long time. Proposition is that if you handle all those things differently and have more diversionary schemes, then the rates of reoffending will drop, which indeed they have done. The emerging neuroscience in brain development tells us that some of the things that young people do not develop until later on than their late teens are risk, empathy, risk management, and those kinds of things that propel young people into difficult situations. After the publication of Lost in Transition, this was received well on both sides of the House by all parties, and absolutely nothing changed. And so this is what propelled the trust and the alliance, what became the alliance, the key players in the organisations in the sector to turn this into a much more purposeful campaigning venture. And that's what they did. Created an alliance of about a dozen key organisations, which was a triangulation of practitioners, policy folk, and campaigners. And that's what they set about doing, challenging the cliff edge over which young people fall at the age of 18 within the system. And the philosophy was to sustain collaborative action together over a period of time. We talk about sharing power at the front end. So in our work, our partners are involved in creating strategy and then iterating it as we go along. And in that sense, the philosophy is that the money, it's a campaign with a budget attached, and the money follows the strategy as it changes and adapts. So I'm going to stop there because I was only allowed 5 minutes and I was threatened with all manner of things if I broke that. So I'm going to hand straight back to Ben, but I'll be back later.
Thanks. I mean, yeah, maybe we were modeling a bit of speaking truth to power there around the timekeeping in the prep. So thank you for keeping to that, Sarah. Much appreciated. We're going to move straight on to Nadine, and over to you.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Sarah. So hi everyone, my name is Nadine. Like I said, I'm the project manager for a project called the Young Justice Advisors, which is a project that is focused on young adults. So working with 18 to 25-year-olds in and out of the justice system with lived experience, really focusing on kind of putting their voices at the heart of everything we do, and creating multiple things from like resources to programs to training, and like first and foremost, obviously Barra Cadbury and were one of our initial funders. So we've actually been working with Barra Cadbury and T2A for almost just over 8 years now, I think, which is really cool. And specifically related to the T2A work, the incorporation and desire to have young adult voices included in everything that they're doing has been amazing, and has been really cool to kind of see that grow. And in terms of funders, obviously we have been funded by them for a long time, and the systemic changes that are needed in terms of young adults is not just something that happens overnight. And I think that that's something that T2A does really well and acknowledges really well, is that, you know, it's not just a click your fingers and kind of everything's done straight away. In terms of like reflections of kind of what's been achieved for us and like overall, I think that the kind of T2A model and the way of working, and supporting young adults and supporting lived experience is just been like incredible. I can't really, I feel like I'm just saying like, oh, they've been great, they've been amazing. But yeah, like they've just been amazing in kind of supporting us on our journey as a project, allowing us to be part of kind of this systems change approach and really incorporating and focusing on the young adult's voice. And that's kind of where we come into it. And that's kind of my perspective. I would say there's also kind of been this shift towards well, it's always been there, but the kind of equitable collaboration side of things that T2A does really well is now kind of going that next step further. And they have one of the young adults that's on our project working with them to really embed and understand like young adult voice and how key and important these things are to an overall systems change. I would say as well, like one thing that T2A have done is really being flexible and adaptable in understanding the landscape of the systems that they're trying to change. If that makes sense. Obviously, it's an uphill battle all the time, continuously. Everything from the policy side of things to, you know, just the day-to-day incorporation of voice and input. It's an uphill battle and it's a struggle. And T2A are really like flexible and adaptable in how they work with people. And I would say that kind of, you know, they're supportive, and something that I find really useful and really helpful is the fact that T2A kind of convenes a space for other people in well, for everyone to kind of share their input, share their work, share what they've been doing, and really create a collaborative approach, not just on the level of themselves being the overarching group, so to speak, but in that they are holding space for other people to collaborate their ideas together and to really work across a system that sometimes often works in silo, and everyone does their own thing and organizations do their own thing. And having T2A there as kind of that middle ground to be like, actually, we're talking about this, or how can we get involved in this? And not just it being one singular organization that gets involved in that, and it's actually more of a group that gets involved, and it's more than one organization that gets involved, is like is amazing. And for me personally, like I found it really helpful to be able to have that opportunity to access policymakers, to access other organizations that might be doing something similar, to open that door for collaboration where normally I wouldn't feel like I would be able to, or I wouldn't even know where to start. So yeah, like the experience with T2A has been like amazing, and obviously with Baracabri as well. But that's it from me. I'm just trying to keep to time. So I'll go back to Ben. Thank you.
Fantastic. Nadine, you've ticked a number of the key features, which I'm going to just reflect on right at the end, that we find about this approach to funding for systems change, collaboration, working across the system. I think that's a really important point we might want to pick up. The importance of flexibility and being adaptable. And of course, as you began by talking about, the need for people with lived experience to be central to that whole change effort. So thank you very much for that. We're going to now move on to Raheel.
Thanks, Ben. Could we have the first slide up, Vanessa? Amazing, thank you. So hi everyone. So just a quick intro into Maslahat's work, and as an organisation that wasn't solely working in the criminal legal system, we had also developed our own approach to systems change, and I think this journey has been really interesting with Barrow Cadbury to sort of understand how they both align, and in times with the criminal legal system, how there can also be friction as well. So Maslahat's work is about understanding, what does liberation mean for our communities? What does that mean for Muslim and racialized communities to be able to live freely without racism and fulfill their potential? And our work cuts across the criminal legal system, education, health, gender rights, and the arts. And for us, in terms of our criminal justice work, it's carried out on three different levels. So it starts at a practice level. Then we then aim to influence at policy and public imagination level. The work we've done has always been about holding both the granular and the systemic in a kind of dynamic relationship with each other in a single gaze. And the dynamic part of that statement is really important because the system for us is always changing and mutating and evolving. And that's particularly important if we consider that and this isn't controversial to say, that the criminal legal system is seen as, consistently institutionally racist, and racism is something that is also constantly evolving and changing. And I know that from having done lots of media this week and talking about Lee Anderson. So what does systems change mean when we've seen a dramatic increase in the number of Muslims in the prison system? That was the kind of conversation that we started with initially with Barrow Cadbury. Over the past 16, 17 years, the number of Muslims in the prison system has more than doubled, now making up 18% of the prison population. Ruth Wilson Gilmore talks about it being a trick of perspective to think of prisons as being on the margins of society. It's a way of actually fracturing the system and therefore also fracturing those communities. And a lot of our work is understanding how over-policing, both in prisons and on the streets, is a form of decontextualizing communities from their heritage, from their complex histories, from their trauma, and isolating them into moments of risk or in quotes, criminality. So all of our work is about putting that context back in. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this was our very first report that we did. Shock horror, it's got Islamophobia in the title. It's okay to say that word if there are any politicians listening. So from this very first report, we began to build up a picture of the extent of Islamophobia in the system. And I think what became really clear was just the absence of data and knowledge around the experiences of Muslims in the prison system. So why, for instance, in doing this work, it was the first time that we had heard that the threat of Friday prayers was used as a way of taking, the threat of not being able to go to Friday prayers was used against every single Muslim man that we have spoken to over the past few years by prison officers. Why is it that hasn't been appearing in standard reports, whether that's from government, other charities, or the academy? There's a quote from Cameron Braithwaite in his essay, Nation Language, and he talks about the need to break down the pentameter. He describes how we need to get rid ourselves of the constraints of the colonizer's language, which is never going to be able to describe the hurricane. It can describe the snow on Shropshire Hills, but it's not going to be able to describe life in Barbados. And so for us, a lot of our work as we moved forward from this report was around how do we work outside the constraints of normal standard knowledge production and research. Can I go to the next slide, please? So this was our second report, Time to End the Silence. And it was a way of, and this is in the report that Ivor produced, which is how do we build together relationships that touch on that kind of granular experience of the prison system, but also hold that systemic view in that one gaze. So we worked with charities who provide some of the most vital services across the prison system in the UK. And we looked at how Muslims in the prison system were accessing their services. And what became really clear quite quickly was we can't just be talking about cultural competency. We have to also be talking about Islamophobia and racism in the prison system. If you're not doing that, then you're not delivering a service that's fit for purpose. What was one of the really kind of the friction, one of the sort of quite sharp friction points was how Islam, for many Muslims that we spoke to, men and women in the prison system, was a form of sanctuary, a form of support. But within the prison system, it was viewed, simple acts of worship were viewed as either being extreme or radical or sort of terrorism related. And they ended up creating this kind of mono identities around Muslims in the prison system, which was harmful and violent. Can we go to the next slide, please? So the next stage of that work has now been actually working with those charities to build services that meet the kind of immediate needs of people within the prison system. It's involved a lot of facilitating conversations, because I think there's people are coming at this work from a different set of vocabulary, but also a different set of experiences. So there's a constant negotiation that has to happen, but it's also holding lots of different relationships and understanding that risk is almost a normal part of doing this work. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is just an example of one of the stories that we heard, and I think it's just, again, it's just speaking to the idea of if this information isn't cropping up in reports, then we never really understand the true extent of the harm and violence that's occurring in the prison system. And this was a story that came from a Muslim prison officer who was told by another officer not to speak in a different language. I think he was speaking in, it doesn't matter what language he was speaking in, because if he spoke in a different language, he would be more prone to corruption, to sort of be converted into a terrorist. And I think there's this sense of Islam almost being a contagion, and therefore Muslims need to be contained. And I think the idea of, we initially were thinking, how can services better understand the kind of different religious heritages and traditions of Muslim communities, but there's also there's an understanding that people do understand how important Islam and religion can be to Muslims in the prison system, but that's almost being leveraged as a form of denial of human rights. Can we go to the next slide, please? And for me, just to sort of touch on systems work here, I think there's something about understanding that there are different systems in play, and those systems aren't always working towards the same goal. So for me, this has come out of building, how can we build a system of support and community infrastructure that sits outside of the formal criminal justice system. And this is a therapeutic, a politically conscious service that's run by us and other community organisations, and is also working with Muslim therapists. But it's starting with a therapy service, and it's part of the work we're doing with Barrow Cadbury around faith and a justice network. But what it enables us to do is to kind of mobilise other stakeholders and partners and parts of the community as well. Because I think as our work has evolved with Barrow Cadbury, I think what's become really clear is there are no borders around systems when doing this work. But what's also become really clear is the importance of how you interpret the system and who's interpreting the system, and who's absent when that work is also being done. And so this is an example of almost creating a system, an ecosystem from scratch. I think I'll stop there, Ben. I think that's 10 minutes.
Great. Thank you very much, Raheel. I mean, like Nadine, you've picked up on some of the key challenges and observations made through this work. And a couple of them occur to me before I hand over to Sarah. One is just around the complexity. You're talking about multiple systems which may not share the same goal, and also systems not having, there being no borders to all of those systems. So I'll pick up on that myself in a minute. But also, I think the challenge of this dynamic interplay between the granular and the systemic, and the need for them to be kind of mutually reinforcing in this work. That it's a reminder, therefore, of what a long-term struggle a lot of this work is, and what that requires of funders is something quite different, as obviously we develop in the report. But I think we might hear some reflections now from Sarah on that before we come back to me. And then just a reminder, if you've got any questions, please, or comments or opinions or points of contestation, please put them in, and we'll have a bit of time at around 10 past or quarter past to just pick up on some of those. But for now, thanks, Raheel, and on to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you very much, Nadine and Raheel, for those very interesting reflections and challenge. The reason that we decided to do this, and it was really the brainchild of a former chair of the trust, Anna Southall, who was behind the beginnings of this work, together with a number of other leaders in the criminal justice space. What we wanted to do was, we didn't want to commission an evaluation of T2A itself, although there's been quite a lot of that one way and another, but more of an assessment of what it takes to do this kind of work. And it was partly because there's, since the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter and the things that followed from that, there's been a lot of talk around foundations about system change. We actually prefer the term structural change, and because some kinds of systems change can be about improving a system of interplaying actors, whereas we want to actually disturb the foundations upon which things are based, of inequality and racism and misogyny. So that's our preferred term, but it's contested, all that language. But we wanted to look at, and asked Ben to come and his team to come and help us look at the conditions that are needed in order for this kind of work to take place. And so that's what I'm going to talk about now, just for a few minutes. And the key things, I think, right at the very top of the list is a long time horizon. This work has been going on now for, it's a little shy of 20 years, but not much. And changing systems is long haul work, and it requires the input of many hands and organizations usually over a long time. So 3-year strategic cycles without a built-in expectation of iterative renewal multiple times will rarely cut it, really. And many foundations, for lots of different reasons, actually cannot commit to that. And that's very understandable. And as I say, those are very different reasons for that. The second is appropriate governance arrangements for long-term work. Governance arrangements where long-term work is the expected norm for the organization and our work. If your board churn makes this unlikely, then it's not really going to be for you. You're going to find it frustrating and expensive and time-consuming and resource wasteful to start something going and then stop. So those are crucial things. In order to create real change across a range of parts of a system, you need to work in a highly collaborative way. As you know, what we say is, that if you're trying to change the world, you can't do it on your own, and you'd be foolish to try. So we approach our collaboratives by making every attempt to share power, and never losing sight of the fact that at the end of the day, we're the ones that are holding a lot of the resource, and at times to holding back from exercising power along the way, and that's a kind of easy soundbite and a difficult journey, and it's a journey that goes on and on and on, so we work. The highly collaborative approach has to also go hand in glove with long-term partnerships, and by that I don't mean 20-year grants, but 20-year relationships, and the menace to long-term partnerships of all kinds, and we've all been there, is churn. It's churn in the civil service, churn of government, and also churn within the partner organizations, and memory gets lost and has to keep being reinvented. So the expectation is to be realistic in your expectation of creating incremental change is essential and actually very difficult, and at times dispiriting. This means building meaningful bridges to statutory sector sympathisers and building robust relations with successive governments. And not all organisations have got an appetite for that. So to create this kind of change takes time and patience, and it's not a crash and burn thing. So for organisations that want to see wholesale political change, which we do, but this work will not achieve that. This work will achieve better outcomes in the long run for within the system that we have been with many others attempting to change. Progress is patchy. It's messy. It's unpredictable. This work, all kinds of obstacles gets thrown up in your way, setbacks, and what you need in order to deal with that is faith and confidence, persistence, resilience. Those things are they have to be embedded culturally in the organisation and in the partnerships, and this is not easy. Which is not to say that anything that others of you are doing is easy, but one of the other things that's very key is the staffing resource, because to do this kind of work, our programme leads have to be subject experts, not grant making experts. We don't even talk about grant making. The money follows the strategy, and T2A is a campaign with budget attached, and so the skill base is very different. So Max Rutherford, that used to run the campaign, had come from the Sainsbury's Mental Health Centre, where he had effectively worked with and authored the Corsten report. And then Laurie Hunt, that runs the programme now, we poached him from the Ministry of Justice from the Lammy Review. So these are very different skills, and require a different staffing base as well as a different mindset. And finally, from our point of view as an organisation, we have always placed emphasis on race and gender justice and on what we used to call voice. But I think it's definitely fair to say that that our understanding of how to do that well has it incrementally increased over time. And I think looking back at earlier things that we did, you know, a number of years back, you know, we think now we would assess that as having been pretty extractive. And I think now there's a time during which during the pandemic there was particularly around foundations. This is not a collaborative of foundations, as you've heard, but a lot of foundations started to be much more self-searching around issues, particularly of racial inequality, and I'm really very happy to say that I think that's really stuck, and that's not going to go away as it has in the past, come in waves and gone and gone. And so that's absolutely great. So I think I'm going to stop because I'm getting the evil eye here again. But our purpose in doing this was to learn more for ourselves about these conditions and to think more deeply about them, which has caused us and is causing us to do, but also for others of you to bear in mind that to do this kind of work is different to generic grant making. If you've got multi-millions to give away every year, which we certainly don't, then it's very good to get that money out to good hands in a wide variety of situations. It's not the same, and it takes different skills and different organizational vision. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you, Sarah, very much. We've got some questions and panel I've put in the chat where I think you might pick up in 2 or 3 minutes just after I make some closing remarks. So we'll keep them coming, but we're going to try and look at those. I want to also acknowledge in the participant list, a lot of people who've been absolutely key to T2A are here, but including Leroy Logan, currently chair of T2A, and bookending it, Anna Southall, who was the guiding spirit for this work and hugely influential in its inception, and also I think that in the sustained commitment. So thank you, Leroy and Anna, also for taking part, and thanks, Sarah, because I think this was an important opportunity. I am going to give a slightly more sort of blunt view about why this work was important, because I think we see foundations, and I've seen this over my 36 years in the sector, rush to embrace new ideas, and the risk of the zeitgeist is always that, to use a very hackneyed Ivar phrase, form doesn't follow function, and suddenly charities are being told the funders are only in systems change, but the funding model and the relationship hasn't shifted. And what this story tells us, and as Sarah has said, and we've heard from Raheel and Nadine, is this is not business as usual. And we say in the report, it is not for the faint-hearted or for people in a hurry or for people who prefer order and certainty of outcome. It's messy and it's erratic, and you're never really sure what's just around the corner. And our panelists have revealed the complexity and have revealed how certain things are very, very important. And we've identified 7 features, which we hope will be helpful in the report. But if we think about some of them, the idea of achieving equitable collaboration, for funders, that really means being alert to the distorting effect of the power of money on those relationships, and actively and intentionally working to minimize that, especially when it comes to forks in the road and choices that have to be made about what to prioritize. We've also heard about the importance of making a long-term commitment, long-haul work, as Sarah described it. And change in this work is going to be measured in decades, not years. And that means that for funders whose resources or preferences or ethos make long-term commitment challenging, it's really important to seriously consider whether this approach works for you. This isn't for everyone. There's no shame in that, but it's really important that this is done well, because the harm that can be caused by not having some of those conditions in place is significant. We've also heard from Nadine about the importance of expertise of people with lived experience being central to these change efforts, and supporting their leadership and agency is, and this is welcome, increasingly recognized as crucial, but it's also complicated, and it requires working in different modes and at different pace and at different ways. And we have to unlearn some of the assumptions that we bring into this work. We've also heard, finally, about the importance of high tolerance of risk and uncertainty. It requires a healthy dose of realism in judgments about progress, success, and failures. And funders, particularly in their pivotal role at the nexus of many of these change efforts, need to hold their nerve in the face of setbacks and in challenging environment for change. And Raheel alluded to some of those that are very present just this week. And that actually persistence, agility, patience, opportunism are the important virtues here. And again, I would say that is not business as usual in the often rather performative nature of funding relationships. So I think, and I can say this because I'm not in Barrack Cadbury Trust or T2A, I think this is a powerful example of doing things differently, and a powerful expression of many of those features which we're highlighting in the report. But that doesn't come easily and won't come easily to many funders. And so I think there is a sobering message from the report, that if you're going to do this, you do need to do it carefully, with great care, and with real integrity and intentionality. So I'm going to go back. We've got some great questions. As I said at the beginning, if we can't answer these, we will currently try and pick up on them. I'm going to...
Ben, can I just come in with 2 points before you start that?
Hey, Sarah.
Sorry. One is that I've been corrected back channel by Nadia in our team. When I spoke about Matt Rutherford, he had actually been working on the Bradley review, not the Corsted report. So just to correct this for the record, I should have mentioned that T2A has had a succession of independent chairs, and that has been a really important feature. So that they have all been sort of, you know, quite big names in the justice system. And the vice chair has been Debbie Pippard, who's our director of programs, and that's worked very well. And the other thing that we've had to think about and have to think about all the time is, what's the lost opportunity? If we spend all this resource and time and effort and money on this over this period of time, you know, people, one of the things to think about is what else might you have done with otherwise? But just on the other hand, to finish on a good note, you know, in the past 10 years, the number of young adults in the criminal justice in prison has halved. It's halved from 23 or 4,000 from 20,000 to 11.5. I'll stop now, sorry.
Thank you very much. We've got a lot of questions here, and I'm gonna, Raheel, I don't know if you're following the chat. There is a direct question for you about individuals coming out of prison needing to receive therapy and a mismatch. And there, I think we're talking about the extension of the system, in a sense, out of just the locus of criminal justice itself into you know, the wider community. Your point earlier, are you able to pick up on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this speaks to the point. I mean, it speaks to how our relationship with Barrow Cadbury started, because there was an understanding from them that when they're talking about young adults, like, what adults are we talking about? You know, like, what's their heritage, what's their race, what's their religion? And so, and because as an organisation we had been commissioned by the NHS for nearly 10 years, producing resources for them, we knew that a one-size-fits-all approach never works. So we had already been producing health resources around depression, anxiety, heart disease, diabetes. We've produced health resources with a project called Muslim Girls Fence. And we know how to work in communities, but also with public services, to produce something that will resonate with those communities and those communities can own. I think it's a difficult thing to do, but it's something that we were able to do. I think what's interesting is that within the criminal justice system, there's such a lack of, I think, racial literacy that is often missing. And I think that is a challenge to the system, and why this work is needed. So it is difficult to do, but I think because of our other work and because we just didn't see Muslim communities as a prison problem, we had that wider view of our communities, we were able to do that.
Thanks, Raheel. We've got a set of related questions really around, at a very simple level, how you report in this kind of different relationship and different change effort through to how we're understanding impact in that. Sarah, I wondered if you might want to set us off there, and then it'd be interesting to hear from Nadine and Raheel as your perspective as funded partners, how that experience has played out.
The criminal justice system has got many parts to it. We typologize that as a pathway from pre-arrest to arrest, through magistrates' courts, through policing, through prison, through prison aftercare and resettlement, and so forth. And so it is a very difficult thing for a campaign like this to track empirically with great accuracy what the impact of the work is. So I guess we think of that in terms of proxies, one of which is to do with sort of published numbers about, you know, who's where and who's what, and, you know, racial disproportionality changes to that, which have sometime gone in the wrong direction, incidentally. But also each stage of the work has some form of evaluation. So the first handful of years, those pilots, they had a formative evaluation from Oxford University, and then summative, and also at the same time a cost-benefit analysis of the work of those pilots. None of which is superbly robust, it has to be said. And in fact, Ivor did a case study on this a number of years ago, that particular thing. We then had a series of pathway projects running with what was then at that unit that was then at Manchester Met, and under Professor Kevin Wong, and those were formative as well, and I would say told us a lot more about what was going on and what sort of influence and impact that the trust was having. As a consequence of that, we then placed a secondee from one of those projects into the Ministry of Justice for a year or 18 months. And very recently, we've had a secondee based with us from the ministry for about 18 months, working on these issues. So I think I could talk in more detail about individual bits of things, but we've had some major successes, and those are the things that keep us going, really. And we've always, one of our mantras as an organisation is that we do the things that are that it's important to do rather than the things that are easy to measure. And we certainly live up to that.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm going to ask Raheel and Nadine for their experience of reporting and expectations around inverted commas impact in this kind of work, and perhaps we can also think about trying to draw out whether there is anything distinctive going on here that it gives us a lesson for others. Raheel, can I start with you, and then Nadine, I'll come to you, if that's okay?
I think for us, it's always felt like it's been a collaborative process. Even, you know, as we're sort of applying, we're sort of thinking through together, like what is the problem and how do we move forward? It's, I mean, speaking specifically about Muslims in the prison system, it's such a highly, for many people, such a, I think, an area of risk. So I think for, you know, I don't know how many other funders would have come to us all together and been like, you know, let's do this piece of work. And I think that, you know, that means a lot. There's such a and so because it's already seen as a really risky piece of work to do, and there are so many prejudices and racisms around the experience of Muslims in the prison system, both in government and more widely, where that work will lead to is often like not necessarily defined, but there's a sort of level of trust that actually we will work on this together and there will be a journey that we go on together. So a really basic one was there was such a dearth of evidence on the experience of Muslims in the prison system, like what is even happening? You know, could we even be able to bear witness to that, record that and disseminate that more publicly? And we have been able to do that. And then out of that, we've actually been able to leverage quite significant change in really large charities in how they practice their work across the prison system. And that means it has the potential to have a direct impact on individuals in the prison system. Now, I couldn't have said that that's what we would have been able to do when we first started off. But that is the journey we've gone on. The other thing that I've been really clear about is we do want to influence policy. That seems more obstinate at the moment. But the other thing is it's also wider communities. And that's the bit that's also really mobilizing, I think, really well for us. And people just more generally understanding the Muslim prison population is 18%. Why are they not collecting data on that? The government actually is not collecting data. The only part they collect data on religion is when you're in prison. They don't collect it at any other part of the criminal justice system. So it's deliberately hiding how that increase has happened. So you don't collect that data either because you don't have the skills and expertise to collect it, or those communities don't matter enough, or it's both. Either way, it's not a great response.
Thanks, Raheel. Nadine, I think people are interested in what it feels like to be a funded partner in this kind of effort, particularly around reporting and expectations around impact, which are often real obstacles for us as charities. And Sarah, I'm going to come on to you and ask about board buy-in and that kind of stuff in a second.
So I'd say a little bit similar to Rahil's kind of first point around actually the collaborative approach when it comes to kind of sharing what we're doing and how we're doing it is so important, and has been really important for us. And especially, like I said before, like the adaptability of understanding that sometimes things don't go right and they're not always going to go right. And particularly when you are working with bars, obviously we're working with lived experience, young adults, we're working in prisons, we're working in the community, and we're battling this kind of big system, and we've got so many barriers in front of us. It doesn't always happen the way that we want it to happen. And I think for us, kind of like a prime example of that approach of actually helping and kind of being there and supporting was around everything that happened in COVID. So during COVID, we were due to publish a report. I was panicking because I was like, oh, we're not going to hit our numbers. Like, you know, the amount of people that we wanted to engage with because prison shut down pretty much, weren't letting anybody in. And we managed to kind of almost get there. So we didn't reach the target we initially agreed, and we almost got there. And it was just like the actual understanding and care approach from the funder to be like, actually, we know, like, we get it, it's okay. And let's think about what's coming out of these kind of 300 voices rather than the 500 that you initially wanted. Let's think about kind of how you're drawing on those kind of experiences and everything else, and just that kind of care and support around kind of reporting and being adaptable and being supportive for us is kind of what's been key. But again, also taken from our recommendations and our kind of solutions and really platforming us and really incorporating the lived experience voice into the journey has been brilliant.
Thanks, Nadine. Sarah, we've got only a small number of minutes. This question really about how you get boards to accept this degree of inverted commas risk and live with the mess. And then I'm going to ask you all for closing reflection, thinking really about a message for other funders thinking about taking on this work, about what they really should be having front of mind if and when they do that. But Sarah, to you first, that's okay.
Yes, thanks, Raheel and Nadine for those reflections. This is a tough one, really, and I'm not necessarily best placed to answer it, because this work had started when I joined the trust. It was still relatively in its early stages, but this is a board that has attempted to work in this way for a long time, and so I often am in the company of other chief execs of UK of international foundations, and find myself the person who hasn't had the problem of bringing boards with them on these kind of journeys. So I think what matters really is to know what your cultural structure is, and what is your organizational identity, because culture, as we all actually know in our waters, eats strategy for breakfast, and it's so important. It's completely key. And if your organizational culture and identity is very fixed, I think that's a very difficult thing to make more labile, if you like. But it can be done. But it is the job primarily of the executive team. But in our approach at Barrow Cadbury, we are values aligned. We recruit for the social justice value base, which we all share, and that's the entire staff team. That's the partners that we work with, by and large, and that's our board. And I do believe, and I've talked to Ben about this over the years, but the values alignment is absolutely critical. So I don't think of it as seeing it as getting a board to buy in so much as providing the conditions in which boards, people are volunteers on boards, and they're of good heart by and large, and they need to see why this would or would not for your organization be a good idea.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm gonna give Raheel and Nadine, if I start with you, Nadine, just 20 seconds message for funders, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, cool. Perfect. So for any funders that are thinking of working in this way, firstly, I would just say do it. Just do it, and make sure that you're doing it in a way that incorporates the voices of the people of the systems you're trying to change, first and foremost. Like, I guess that's just kind of my main message. Obviously, I'm like, yeah, that's just it, really.
Thanks, Nadine. Thank you very much. And Raheel, last word.
I would say that if you're a funder that is doing any kind of work around tackling racisms, you have to be thinking in a structural and systemic way. Otherwise, anything else is really just a sort of just tinkering at the edges, because racism is a state sanction and leads to people's premature death, and so we need to think about it in that kind of scale.
Thank you everyone. I'm sorry we've overrun by 2 minutes. Huge appreciation to Sarah and Raheel and Nadine for your time. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you everyone who's on the call who contributed to the study and spoke so candidly and openly about their experiences. Thank you especially Anna Southall, if you're still there, for inspiring all of this. And go well everyone. Read the report, and if you're going to do it properly. Bye.